When you're doing a movie, you don't know what you got. You kind of in general know what you got, but you don't know exactly how this is going to go together and what's going to come out of it.
For over 30 years, Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer shared one of Hollywood's most legendary on-screen dynamics in the Western classic Tombstone. Their incredible chemistry fueled decades of rumors about what actually happened behind the scenes during that notoriously chaotic and difficult production. Now, at 75, Kurt Russell has finally broken his silence to share the definitive truth about his co-star and friend. What did Kurt Russell finally reveal about Val Kilmer? And what was the real story behind their historic bond on set? Join us as we look at the truth. The hidden truth about the making of Tombstone. Before anyone started debating what really happened between Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer, there was simply Tombstone. Today, it's remembered as one of the greatest westerns ever made. But when cameras first started rolling in the Arizona desert during the spring of 1993, nobody could have predicted just how turbulent the journey would become. What looked like an ordinary Hollywood production would soon be hit with unexpected setbacks, major creative shakeups, and behind-the-scenes stories that refused to disappear long after the cameras stopped rolling.
Doc, been hitting awful hard, haven't you?
Nonsense. I've not yet begun to defile myself.
On screen, however, none of that chaos was visible. Audiences were treated to a gripping retelling of one of the Old West's most famous chapters. Inspired by the real events that unfolded in southeastern Arizona during the 1880s, the film followed legendary figures including Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Johnny Ringo, and Curly Bill Brocious as tensions built toward the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral and the violent events that followed. Packed with action, unforgettable characters, and emotional stakes, the movie felt bigger than a typical Western, and viewers responded immediately. Helping bring that story to life was an all-star cast led by Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer, alongside Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, Powers Booth, Michael Biehn, Dana Delaney, Charlton Heston, and narration from Robert Mitchum. Every actor brought something memorable to the screen, but few people realized that while audiences were watching these larger-than-life performances unfold, the production itself was fighting its own battle behind the scenes. The trouble began almost as soon as filming got underway. Screenwriter Kevin Jarrah had been given the opportunity to direct the movie himself, marking his first time behind the camera. It was a massive responsibility, and before long, the production began falling behind schedule. Essential scenes weren't being completed, valuable shooting days were slipping away, and concerns inside the studio continued to grow. Only weeks after filming began, the decision was made to remove Jarrah from the project altogether. Veteran filmmaker George P. Cosmatos was brought in to steady the ship, but stepping into a major production halfway through filming was never going to be simple. Some people welcomed the change, while others questioned the new direction. Even years later, those who worked on the movie would remember that period very differently, with conflicting stories emerging about what was really happening behind closed doors. As filming continued, the screenplay also went through major changes. Entire subplots disappeared, scenes were reworked, and the story gradually became leaner and more focused than the original version. At the time, audiences had no idea how much the film was evolving from one week to the next. They simply saw a polished Western when it finally reached theaters. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the production, one thing never changed: the determination to make the world of Tombstone feel authentic. Nearly every costume, prop, and building was carefully designed to capture the spirit of the Old West. Even the actors committed themselves to that goal. Val Kilmer spent countless hours refining Doc Holliday's lightning-fast draw and distinctive Southern manner of speaking. while attention was paid to the smallest historical details, right down to the facial hair worn by almost every actor on screen. When Tombstone finally premiered on Christmas Day in 1993, it entered theaters during one of the year's most competitive holiday seasons. Even so, audiences quickly embraced it. Strong word of mouth kept attendance growing, and the film ultimately earned more than $73 million worldwide. Critics praised its performances and storytelling, while Val Kilmer's portrayal of Doc Holliday soon became one of the most celebrated performances in Western movie history. Over time, Tombstone transformed from a box office success into a genuine cult classic. But as the film's reputation continued to grow, so did the stories surrounding its production. Different cast and crew members began sharing very different memories of what had taken place on set. Some accounts lined up. Others contradicted one another completely. Decades later, those unanswered questions would become impossible to ignore, especially after Kurt Russell finally decided to tell his side of the story. The life and career that made Kurt Russell a legend. Long before Tombstone turned Kurt Russell into one of the most memorable versions of Wyatt Earp ever put on screen, he had already spent decades building a career that few actors could match. By the time he rode into the dusty streets of Tombstone in 1993, Russell wasn't simply another Hollywood leading man taking on a Western. He was an experienced performer who had grown up in the entertainment industry, reinvented himself several times, and proved that he could succeed in almost any genre. Looking back at his journey makes it easier to understand why he became such an important figure during the making of the film, and why his voice still carries so much weight today. Kurt Vogel Russell was born on March 17, 1951, in Springfield, Massachusetts, into a family where performing was already part of everyday life. His father, Bing Russell, was a respected actor who appeared in numerous television shows and westerns, while his mother, Louise Crone Russell, had worked as a dancer. Before long, the family relocated to California, where Kurt spent most of his childhood growing up in Thousand Oaks, alongside his three sisters, Jill, Jamie, and Jody. Although acting surrounded him from an early age, it wasn't the only dream competing for his attention. Baseball quickly became one of the biggest passions in his life. Throughout grade school and high school, Russell was a talented second baseman who spent countless hours on the field. He graduated from Thousand Oaks High School in 1969, but even before finishing school, he had already started making a name for himself in another profession. His acting career began remarkably early. In 1962, Russell made his television debut with appearances on Dennis the Menace and the Dick Powell Theater. That same year, he auditioned for the baseball-themed film Safe at Home, hoping it would give him the chance to meet two of his heroes, Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris. Although he wasn't cast, the disappointment didn't slow him down. Instead, more opportunities kept arriving. He appeared in The Travels of Jamie McFeeters, followed by guest roles in popular television series like The Man from UNCLE and Gilligan's Island. In 1963, he also stepped onto the big screen for the first time in It Happened at the World's Fair, marking the beginning of what would become one of Hollywood's longest-running careers. Russell's natural charm soon caught the attention of Walt Disney Studios, and while many young actors struggled to find consistent work, he became one of Disney's most recognizable stars. Beginning with Follow Me, Boys, in 1966, he appeared in a string of successful family films, including The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes and Super Dad. Those movies introduced him to an entirely new generation of audiences and established him as one of Disney's brightest young talents. Even as his acting career flourished, Russell refused to give up on baseball. Instead of choosing one dream over the other, he pursued both. In 1971, he signed a minor league baseball contract and spent 2 seasons playing Class A baseball in the Northwest League, where he developed into an all-star infielder. For a while, it genuinely looked as though professional baseball might become his future. Then, everything changed. In 1973, Russell suffered a serious shoulder injury that required surgery after reaching the Class AA level in El Paso. The damage effectively ended his baseball career before it had the chance to reach the major leagues. It was a devastating setback, especially considering how much of his life he had devoted to the sport. Ironically, baseball had always been part of his family's story. His father had also played professionally in the minor leagues, and years later his nephew, Matt Franco, would go on to reach Major League Baseball. While balancing acting and sports, Russell was also serving his country. Between 1969 and 1975, he served in the California Air National Guard as part of the 146th Tactical Airlift Wing based in Van Nuys, adding another chapter to an already unusually diverse early career. With baseball no longer an option, Russell turned his full attention back to acting. Unlike many child stars whose careers faded as they grew older, he made the transition into adult roles with surprising ease. Rather than being trapped by his Disney image, he embraced more mature and challenging characters that allowed audiences to see an entirely different side of his abilities. That transformation became especially clear during the 1970s. His performances in the television films The Deadly Tower and Elvis earned widespread praise, particularly his portrayal of Elvis Presley. The project also introduced him to director John Carpenter, beginning one of the most successful actor-director partnerships in modern cinema. Together, Russell and Carpenter created a series of memorable films, starting with Escape from New York in 1981. Russell's portrayal of Snake Plissken instantly became iconic, turning the eye-patch-wearing anti-hero into one of the most recognizable action characters of the decade. The film eventually achieved cult classic status and firmly established Russell as a bankable leading man. The success continued with The Thing in 1982, which would later become one of the most influential science fiction horror films ever made. He then demonstrated his dramatic range alongside Meryl Streep in Silkwood before appearing opposite Goldie Hawn in Swing Shift in 1984. Although the movie failed to impress at the box office, it changed Russell's personal life forever. He and Hawn began a relationship that would become one of Hollywood's longest-lasting and most admired partnerships. Throughout the rest of the 1980s, Russell proved he wasn't limited to one style of filmmaking. He moved comfortably between crime dramas, thrillers, action movies, and comedies. Films like The Mean Season, Tequila Sunrise, and Tango and Cash kept him among Hollywood's biggest stars, while Backdraft in 1991 reminded audiences that he could deliver powerful dramatic performances just as easily as explosive action scenes. Then came Tombstone. Released in 1993, the film became another defining moment in Russell's career. His portrayal of Wyatt Earp anchored the story and helped transform the Western into a box office success that would eventually earn cult classic status. Although audiences fell in love with what they saw on screen, very few realized that the production itself had become one of Hollywood's most talked-about sets. As the years passed, more details about what happened behind the cameras slowly began to emerge, adding another layer of intrigue to a film that was already becoming legendary. Russell's success didn't slow after Tombstone. He starred in Stargate before reuniting with John Carpenter for Escape from L.A. In the years that followed, he continued proving his remarkable versatility with films like Miracle, Poseidon, Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof, and The Hateful Eight, Deepwater Horizon, several installments of the Fast and Furious franchise, and Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. He even delighted audiences by playing Santa Claus in the Christmas Chronicles alongside Goldie Hawn, before making a memorable appearance in Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. By the time Tombstone reached its 30th anniversary, Kurt Russell had built a career spanning more than 6 decades. Yet despite everything he accomplished, one chapter continued to generate more curiosity than almost any other. The making of Tombstone never stopped raising questions, and decades later, those questions would finally lead Russell to reveal his own version of what really happened behind the scenes. The untold story behind Tombstone's legendary cast. One of the biggest reasons Tombstone feels so perfectly cast is because it's almost impossible to imagine anyone other than Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer leading the film. Yet, surprisingly, neither actor was originally supposed to wear those iconic costumes. In fact, if a few early decisions had gone differently, audiences might have watched a completely different version of Tombstone with an entirely different cast. The role of Wyatt Earp was first offered to Kevin Costner, while Willem Dafoe was considered for Doc Holliday. At the time, Costner had already developed a strong interest in telling Wyatt Earp's story. But instead of joining Tombstone, he chose to create his own version of the legendary lawman's life. That decision eventually led to the release of Wyatt Earp in 1994. Val Kilmer's involvement also nearly took a different turn. He originally became interested in playing Doc Holliday because of Costner's participation, but after Costner stepped away from the project, Kilmer remained committed. Looking back, that decision proved to be one of the most important in the film's history, as his portrayal of the witty but dying gunslinger would go on to become one of the most celebrated performances of his career. Before Kurt Russell officially stepped into Wyatt Earp's boots, the filmmakers reportedly hoped to cast one of his closest friends, Jeff Bridges. Bridges ultimately passed on the opportunity, leaving the role open for Russell. It's one of those fascinating Hollywood what-ifs that completely changed the direction of the film. While the casting was still coming together, screenwriter Kevin Jarrah was busy doing something very few writers would ever commit to. Rather than relying solely on books and historical records, he temporarily moved to Tombstone, Arizona, determined to experience the town for himself. Jarrah immersed himself in its history, explored the famous landmarks connected to Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, and even enrolled in cowboy camp, where he learned how to ride horses, handle firearms, and wear six-shooters the way 19th-century lawmen actually did. Instead of simply writing about the Old West, he wanted to understand how it truly felt to live there. That commitment showed in the finished screenplay. Many historians and Western fans still consider Tombstone one of the most convincing depictions of the gunfight at the OK Corral ever put on film. The attention to detail didn't stop with the script. It extended to nearly every corner of the production, including something as simple as facial hair. Sam Elliott's magnificent mustache as Virgil Earp became almost as memorable as his performance. It looked perfectly suited to the Old West, but remarkably, there was an unexpected historical connection behind it. Elliott's family lineage reportedly connects to Wyatt Earp's descendants, meaning the impressive facial hair seen on screen shared roots with the famous Earp family itself. Of course, Hollywood still gave nature a helping hand. The makeup department enhanced Elliott's already impressive mustache with black mascara, making it appear even fuller on camera. Director George Cosmatos approached the movie with that same level of passion. For him, Tombstone wasn't simply another directing job. It represented the fulfillment of a dream that had stayed with him since childhood. As a young boy growing up in Italy, Cosmatos had watched the 1957 film Gunfight at the OK Corral starring Burt Lancaster. From that moment on, he dreamed of directing his own version of the legendary showdown. Years later, when the opportunity finally arrived, he made sure the climactic gunfight was filmed at the actual OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, adding another layer of authenticity to the production. Throughout filming, Cosmatos remained deeply committed to historical accuracy. Rather than treating the movie as a straightforward Western, he viewed it as a sweeping tragedy unfolding on the American frontier. That philosophy influenced everything from the performances to the staging of the film's biggest moments. Val Kilmer shared that same dedication while preparing to play Doc Holliday. Although the real Holliday wasn't known for playing the banjo, Kilmer learned enough to make every scene believable, ensuring even the smallest details of his character felt authentic. Kurt Russell was no different. Before production began, he worked extensively with legendary firearms instructor Thel Reed to master the weapons used during the 1880s. He trained with classic single-action revolvers, learning everything from drawing quickly to speed loading and fanning the hammer. Rather than simply looking convincing, Russell wanted every movement to resemble the techniques used by real frontier lawmen. That preparation gave the gunfights a level of realism that continues to impress audiences decades later. The world surrounding those performances was just as carefully crafted. Production designer Catherine Hardwick and her team painstakingly recreated the town of Tombstone using historical photographs, architectural drawings, and original records from the period. The massive 12-acre set featured more than 65 buildings constructed specifically for the movie. Actors later recalled that walking through the finished town genuinely felt like stepping into 1881, making it much easier to lose themselves in their characters. Some of the film's most memorable moments also came from unexpected improvisation. Billy Bob Thornton's appearance as Johnny Tyler remains one of the standout scenes in the movie, despite the fact that much of his performance wasn't scripted in detail. He was simply encouraged to play an intimidating bully, giving him the freedom to create the unforgettable confrontation with Kurt Russell's Wyatt Earp. The gamble paid off, allowing Thornton to showcase the talent that would soon make him one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Not every storyline survived the editing process, however. One of the biggest changes involved the romance between Wyatt Earp and Josephine Marcus, played by Dana Delaney. The original version of Tombstone devoted far more time to their relationship, but early test audiences felt the romance pulled attention away from the heart of the story. As a result, much of the subplot was removed before the film reached theaters. Although traces of those scenes remain, the decision ultimately made the movie leaner and more focused. By trimming the romance, the filmmakers kept the spotlight on the themes that continue to define Tombstone today: loyalty, sacrifice, revenge, and the extraordinary events that transformed a small Arizona town into one of the most legendary places in American history. The truth behind Tombstone's most memorable scenes. As realistic as Tombstone felt, it also surprised audiences with just how far it was willing to go. One moment in particular left a lasting impression when Curly Bill Brocious casually bragged about skinning Mexicans. The violence was never shown on screen, but the implication alone was enough to shock moviegoers in 1993. At a time when most Hollywood westerns avoided references to such gruesome acts, the scene felt daring and controversial. Today, after decades of increasingly graphic films and television, many viewers might barely react to it. Back then, however, it reinforced that Tombstone wasn't interested in presenting a sanitized version of the Old West. It wanted audiences to understand just how brutal that world could be. For Kurt Russell, making the film meant much more than starring in another successful Western. Playing Wyatt Earp fulfilled a dream he had carried since childhood. Growing up, he idolized classic cowboy heroes like John Wayne and Roy Rogers, imagining what it would be like to one day wear the badge himself. Years before becoming an established leading man, Russell had even appeared opposite Elvis Presley in It Happened at the World's Fair. Landing the role of Wyatt Earp decades later felt like the payoff to a lifelong ambition, making Tombstone one of the most meaningful projects of his career. That passion extended throughout the entire cast. Before filming officially began, everyone attended a demanding 2-week boot camp at Old Tucson Studios. The goal wasn't simply to teach actors how to look convincing. They were expected to live and move like people from the 1880s. The cast learned horseback riding, gun handling, stagecoach driving, blacksmithing, and other practical frontier skills. By the time cameras started rolling, they weren't just wearing cowboy hats and carrying revolvers. They understood how to use them naturally, giving every scene a level of authenticity that helped separate Tombstone from many other westerns. Even the props reflected that same commitment to history. One of Doc Holliday's most recognizable accessories was the elegant cup and saucer he used while calmly drinking during card games. According to those connected with the production, the antique set once belonged to the real Doc Holliday, before being purchased from a private collector by the film's prop master. Today, it remains on display at the Crystal Palace Saloon in Tombstone, Arizona, allowing visitors to see a fascinating piece of both movie and Wild West history. Another person who almost never became part of the film was Sam Elliott. Before Tombstone, the veteran actor had largely stepped away from Hollywood after becoming frustrated with the industry. But the screenplay immediately grabbed his attention, and knowing Kurt Russell had signed on as Wyatt Earp made returning even more appealing. Fortunately, he accepted the role of Virgil Earp, bringing a quiet strength and commanding presence that became one of the film's greatest assets. Tombstone also arrived at exactly the right moment for the Western genre. By the early 1990s, Hollywood had largely moved away from making big Westerns, and many believed audiences had lost interest in frontier stories altogether. The film proved otherwise. Its combination of thrilling action, memorable characters, and historical atmosphere drew audiences back to the genre, and demonstrated that Westerns could still become major box office successes. In many ways, Tombstone helped revive a style of filmmaking that had been fading for years. The filmmakers also found clever ways to weave real history into the story. Wyatt Earp's dramatic showdown with Curly Bill Brocious wasn't created entirely from imagination. The sequence drew inspiration from the real-life killing of notorious outlaw John Wesley Hardin by El Paso gunman John Selman. Borrowing elements from that famous confrontation added another layer of authenticity to Wyatt's revenge and made the scene even more powerful. Ironically, despite the film's title, very little of Tombstone was actually shot in the real town. Apart from filming the famous OK Corral sequence on location, most of the production took place nearly 200 miles away in Mescal, Arizona. There, the filmmakers built an enormous frontier town from scratch because it was far more practical and cost-effective than filming in Tombstone itself. Thanks to the incredible attention to detail, few viewers ever noticed the difference. The cast's transformation didn't stop with costumes and locations. Makeup artist Jill Rocco used specialized silicone prosthetics, originally designed for burn victims to give the actors weathered skin, deep wrinkles, and the rugged appearance of people who had spent years surviving the harsh frontier. The subtle effects helped every character look as though they truly belonged in the unforgiving world the film worked so hard to recreate. More than 30 years later, those countless details continue to set Tombstone apart. From the fearless storytelling and demanding preparation to the painstaking production design and historical inspiration, every choice helped create a Western that still feels fresh today. That's why the film continues to attract new audiences while remaining one of the most respected and beloved entries the genre has ever produced. Kurt Russell finally reveals the truth about Val Kilmer. For years, people speculated about what Kurt Russell really thought of Val Kilmer. Their unforgettable chemistry in Tombstone led to endless discussions, with fans wondering whether the two stars were simply talented professionals or whether they had formed a genuine friendship behind the scenes. Decades later, Kurt Russell finally shared a story that answered that question better than anything else ever could. Looking back on the making of Tombstone, Russell revealed that working with Kilmer had been an absolute pleasure. As filming came to an end, the cast followed an unofficial tradition of exchanging gifts. It wasn't something anyone was expected to do, but it had become a thoughtful way of marking the end of a memorable production. Wanting to surprise his co-star, Russell quietly arranged something unlike any ordinary Hollywood gift. He even asked his driver to track down Kilmer's costume pieces from the movie, including his holster, gun, hat, and personalized chair, so they could be photographed as part of the presentation. But those items were only the beginning. Russell's real gift perfectly reflected Doc Holliday's character. He bought Val Kilmer a burial plot at Boot Hill Graveyard in Tombstone, Arizona, the historic cemetery where many figures from the Old West were laid to rest. It was a dark joke, but one Russell knew Kilmer would appreciate. What happened next made the moment even more unforgettable. When Kilmer opened the gift, he immediately instructed his own driver to bring out Russell's present. As it turned out, Kilmer had been thinking along remarkably similar lines. Instead of buying Russell a burial plot, he had purchased him an entire acre of land overlooking Boot Hill Cemetery. Without planning it, both actors had independently chosen gifts centered around death and the Old West, a coincidence that perfectly captured the unique connection they had developed while making Tombstone. Russell later reflected that the exchange couldn't have been more fitting. Doc Holliday had always been associated with death, while Wyatt Earp represented life, and somehow their gifts mirrored those characters perfectly. The story took on even greater meaning after Val Kilmer passed away on April 1, 2025, at the age of 65. His daughter, Mercedes Kilmer, confirmed that pneumonia was the cause of his death. Years earlier, Kilmer had battled throat cancer after being diagnosed in 2014 and had eventually recovered before facing his final illness. Following the news of his passing, tributes poured in from across Hollywood, with fellow actors remembering his remarkable talent, fearless creativity, and unforgettable presence. But among all those memories, Kurt Russell's story perhaps revealed the most personal truth of all. Behind the legendary performances, the rumors, and the decades of speculation was a friendship built on mutual respect, shared humor, and the kind of bond that only a film like Tombstone could create. What scene in Tombstone is still your favorite to this very day? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.